Hey nerds, what's up? So I'm known on my channel for a lot of book to adaptation comparisons, and today I thought it'd be really fun to cover Studio Ghibli movies that were inspired by books. Now, I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, you are already somewhat familiar with Studio Ghibli, but just in case, I will give a very light introduction. Studio Ghibli is a Japanese animation studio that was founded in 1985 by director Hayao Miyazaki and a few others, but Miyazaki is the most well-known name of them, and usually who the studio is associated with. Their most well-known movies are titles like Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, Princess Mononoke, Ponyo, Howl's Moving Castle, and Kiki's Delivery Service. Miyazaki himself, as well as the studio, has won numerous awards and has been incredibly influential in animation. My personal experience with Studio Ghibli has actually been mostly in my adulthood. I first saw Howl's Moving Castle on a bus in high school, which just isn't necessarily the best environment to watch a movie, and I didn't watch any other of the Studio Ghibli movies until I was adult. I had always been really interested, especially in like Kiki's Delivery Service. I remember being interested in as a kid, but this was the days before streaming, so if I didn't find it at Blockbuster or if my family didn't want to rent it, we weren't watching it. So it was actually when I was adult that I was like, hey, everyone's obsessed with Studio Ghibli, I kind of want to see what it's all about, and so I watched a ton of them with my kids, and also watched some of my own that were a little too old for my kids, but anyway, I digress. The point is, I quickly fell in love with everything Studio Ghibli for the same reason that everyone else tends to love Miyazaki's work so much: his recognizable aesthetic, his cute and cozy, but often a little creepy storytelling tactics, and overall the vibe of the movies. I think that was one of the elements that just really sold me. I just loved how sweet all the stories really were. Even the creepier stories have a very sweet, charming element to them. And in fact, I fell in love so much that I forced my husband to actually go to Ghibli Park when we were in Japan last spring. Even though Nagoya was very out of our way, I made him go and we had a great time. Also, Totoro says hi. It's just not showing. So in my family, we naturally pick up books if we like movies that we know are inspired by books. So for the last couple of years, after watching Kiki's Delivery Service, The Secret Life of Arrietty, and Howl's Moving Castle, we also picked up their book counterparts. And so today I'm going to compare and contrast them and review them. As a warning, this video will contain spoilers for both the movie and books that I am covering. So if there's one of these movies or books you haven't seen or read and you really are concerned about spoilers, you can use the chapters in the description box below to skip over the movie you don't want to be spoiled on. With that said, I'll see you after the jump. Let's start off with Kiki's Delivery Service. Kiki's Delivery Service is a Japanese book, literally translated as Witches Express Home Delivery. You can see the original Japanese title on screen, and it was written by Eiko, Kadono, and published in 1985. Studio Ghibli's anime came out in 1989. Now, the anime wasn't dubbed into English until 1997, and the book, I was surprised to find out, wasn't translated into English until 2003. So actually, the English version of the story was first introduced to us in the form of the Studio Ghibli film, which is fascinating to me as it's obviously not the original format of the story. One of the largest differences in the book to the movie is that the book really feels more like a collection of small vignettes about Kiki's time with self-contained stories rather than one entire overarching plot, other than obviously the fact that she went to this town for a year. I obviously think it makes a ton of sense for a movie adaptation of this book to make a more cohesive story rather than little vignettes. That clearly makes sense. And most of the characters are taken directly from the vignettes, just kind of pieced together in a more collective story. Although some characters like Tombo, I think play a much bigger role in the movie, where he's in a few vignettes in the book but doesn't play as big of a role. Overall, the overarching story is mostly the same in that it's, dealing with growing up and going on your own. And particularly the beginning of the movie is very lifted directly from the first vignette of the book. The end of the novel also centers more around Kiki having to save a town New Year's celebration by fixing the clock tower, and not to save a crashing flying machine and save Tombo. It's more about saving the morale of the town at the end. Now, a big difference people will be surprised to know is that in the book, Kiki does not start losing her powers, and there isn't this element of her not being able to understand Gigi anymore. Like, a big part of the movie is as she grows up, Gigi spends more time as a cat and they still have a bond, but they don't really think they can talk anymore. That is not the case in the book. Gigi and her can communicate through the entire thing. So obviously that's a little bit of a sad part of the movie. So I kind of liked that in the book that never happened. There was a difference to me that was very surprising, which was in particular Kiki's relationships to other girls in the novel. In the movie, we see her have several negative experiences with other girls, and a plot about her not fitting in because of that. She meets another haughty witch in the air who's pretty bratty, Tombo's friends aren't the nicest, and some girls she delivers to are similarly rude and unwelcoming. So nothing could surprise me more when that is just not the case in the book. In fact, that first interaction with the witch on the broom is much nicer. She's not good at flying and sees that Kiki is really good at flying, and she's kind of giving her helpful tips, and they part on these words. "It's great things seem to be going so well for you. I'm jealous," Kiki said. "You'll do fine. You're cute like me, and you seem fairly smart like me too. Plus, you're good at flying. You do seem a bit on the feisty side, but, well, I'm sure you'll do your best. Anyhow, I'm in a hurry, so see you." In fact, there's even a chapter that is dedicated to Kiki's relationships with another girl. A girl comes in to use her services, and Kiki is pretty jealous of this girl, and this girl isn't really the nicest to her. And in the end, it comes out that the other girl was jealous of Kiki, and they both really admired each other, and they were coming from a place of insecurity. Like, it's an actual plot point in there that they're not treating each other nice because of insecurity, and then they become friends in the end. "I'm sorry. When you came into the shop, you seemed to know everything. I really wanted to know what kind of poem you would write, so I couldn't help myself. I hope you can forgive me," Kiki said. "What? You thought that about me? I felt the same way about you," the girl said. "When I came here, you were so confident and seemed so much smarter than me, even though we're the same age. So I was determined to prove myself. I'm sorry. I think we have much more in common than I first thought, Miss Witch. I bet we would get along." The girl smiled, batting her eyelashes as before. I just thought those are really sweet interactions in the book, especially when you think about girlhood and girl friendships and how that can often be something that naturally happens. And so I was actually a little bummed that the movie decided to change that. I think leaving it out would have been better than having her have so many negative interactions with other girls in the story. So that is a difference I really wanted to highlight with the book. I've had this the whole time and I never showed it. That's okay. Overall, I highly enjoyed this novel, and my 5-year-old daughter, who I read it out loud to, loved it too. So if you love the movie, and I really liked the movie too, obviously. I wouldn't be covering these movies. I like them all. I would highly recommend reading the book. It's really short, really pretty fast-paced, easy to read out loud to a kid, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Next up, let's talk about The Secret World of Arrietty, which was originally titled Arrietty, The Borrower in Japanese, was a Studio Ghibli movie released in 2010 and then translated into English in 2012 and released under the title The Secret World of Arrietty. This Ghibli movie was based on the UK book The Borrowers by Mary Norton, released in 1952. This time I'll bring it up. In broad strokes, I would say the book and the movie are actually pretty similar. You've got the same names, the same general plotline, and even the same bittersweet ending. I would say the biggest difference comes in interactions with the boy. When I was first reading this book out loud to my daughter, she was a little disturbed because the boy is much nicer in the movie to start with than in the book. He's pretty rude in the book, and my daughter's a gentle soul and did not like that. He threatens to hit her with a stick. He threatens to break her in half. It was very disturbing for my daughter. I was fine with it. But this boy in the book is not sick and kindly like the boy in the movie. In fact, he is just visiting from India, and his bigger plot point is that he doesn't know how to read well in English yet. And he loves to read. And so the way that Arrietty and the boy make a friendship is that she offers to read out loud to him, which is sweet. And so the boy ends up being nice. Another huge difference is that Arrietty's whole family loves the boy in the book. In the book, as the boy brings them stuff from the dollhouse and little things for them, Homily, Arrietty's mother, loves it. Like, they have a whole period of time where the boy comes up every day and they're always rearranging the house for the new things he brings, and then Arrietty will read to the boy, and they're all very good friends, which obviously is very different than in the movie where only the boy and Arrietty have a relationship and her parents are still very fearful of him. So ironically, in the end, my daughter really loved that everyone loved the boy and they all got along because it was a little sweeter for her. The slight difference with the ending is that in the book, the boy doesn't actually know if the borrowers escaped or not. They are putting the rat poison through all of the ducts or whatever and trying to flush them out. And the boy manages to escape and open up a grate on the side, but then has to run away and never actually sees the borrowers leave. He just hopes they end up escaping. Unlike the movie where they have this sweet little ending moment where he gets to see them sail away. The framing story is like, and he never saw them again. He doesn't know, if they made it away. But there are other books in this series, which I think talks about what happens to them. And I think in the end, the boy does get to see them. But in this main book, he doesn't. So very similar bittersweet ending in that they're parting, but they don't have that final moment. So this is one, although I think the book is really cute and worth a read, and it's obviously a classic, I do prefer the movie to the book, I think. And my daughter did end up getting really into this. She did want to buy the second one, but it was harder for her to get into because it's much, much slower in the beginning. It takes a really long time in such a short book for this to get started because I think she kept wanting to get to the borrowing and get to her meeting the boy, but it's a long time till we get there. And so maybe because she had seen the movie first, it made it harder. This was also written in the 1950s, and so there's kind of some language that I kept having to explain to her. And in fact, one of the big plot points is that because Arrietty is a girl, she can't go borrowing, and my daughter was confused by that, which good for her. She was like, why do you keep being like, because she's a girl, she can't borrow? And that's obviously completely removed from the movie, which I guess just like more of a modern audience thing, which I know people aren't gonna like, but I do think it worked better for how it was stated, that it was just super dangerous in the movie. One thing is that reading this book brought up the memory that I definitely saw a different adaptation of this book. And I Googled it and I was like, oh, it was called The Borrowers and it came out in 1997. And I watched the preview to kind of jog my memory, even though it was like decades ago. And I'm like, oh, clearly Secret World of Arrietty is a much better adaptation of this book than that 1997 movie, which definitely went a super different direction. So just gonna put that plug. I really wish I had seen The Secret World of Arrietty as a kid because I loved movies and books about, like dolls coming to life or little like fairies and things like that. And so that was just a funny memory. Ultimately, I enjoyed the movie more. I loved the Ghibli aesthetic of it, and I think it did a good job slightly modernizing some of the things from the 1950s novel in a way that didn't disrupt from the themes or overall message or plot of the story. And finally, Howl's Moving Castle. Howl's Moving Castle is a novel written by a famous and influential UK fantasy author, Dianna Wynn Jones, and was published in 1986. And it honestly had some quite terrifying covers. Check these out. Very far from the aesthetics of the eventual Studio Ghibli production of the same name, which was released in 2004 and dubbed into English in 2005. I also think it's clear that the new covers are reflective of the Ghibli aesthetic. So when we compare the book to the movie, all of the same general elements are there, and the plot is pretty similar for the first half, but about at the halfway point, we diverge, in my opinion, quite a bit. In both, there's still Sophie, there's Howl, there's Calcifer, the Witch of the Waste, Turnip Head, a missing prince, a moving castle, there's a curse, there's a pact, and a falling star. So again, in broad strokes, we are there. I would say characterization-wise, Howl is much more likable in the movie. They just make him more likable. He's even more flawed in the novel. I also think Sophie has a little more gumption in the novel, so to speak. She obviously has plenty in the film, but there's just like a little more like oomph or sassiness in the book. I just think she's also a little bit more flawed, just like Howl. So I'll talk about some of the biggest deviations in plot. The first being that Sophie being the eldest of three sisters is a much bigger plot point in the book, and in particular, her sisters play a way larger role. They are present through the entire book and have many active roles in what is happening, including the fact that the apprentice of Howl, which is Michael in the book, and I think it's a different name in the movie, and I just can't remember. I'll put it up on screen. Has a romance with one of Sophie's sisters. Turnip Head plays a much smaller role in the novel, and in fact, instead of being a friend, is feared, like very, very feared for about 90% of this novel. The war is mentioned in the book, but is not nearly the threat that it is in the movie. And in fact, it's more like we are going to go to war. We're not currently at war, and Howl is not playing the active role in that war that were shown in the movie. So that is just really not a plot point, honestly, in the book almost at all. The Witch of the Waste is also a way bigger threat in the novel and is actually the main like climax and point of the novel is defeating the Witch of the Waste. She never becomes pacified like she does within the movie and never lives with them. And it's revealed that she's also made a pact with a fire demon, but has turned to the evil side in the book. So very, very different end for the Witch of the Waste in the novel. There's also a much more in-depth and complex plot about the missing prince, because there's also this missing wizard. And it's like they're both kind of combined in Turnip Head and also in a dog. It's very complicated, but to very oversimplify, in the end, it all gets sorted out. And essentially, Turnip Head is in love with Letty, which is Sophie's sister. Now, this was a part that I liked so much better in the book, because one of the things that bothered me a lot in the movie when I watched it is, why is Turnip Head in love with Sophie? They seemingly have never met, and he's like, oh, I'm in love with you, but I can see your heart's with someone else, oh no. And it just always felt so random, out of place, like, why are you here? Even though I know you're the missing prince, it just seems so random. In the book, I think that plot line is resolved, even though it's crazy. Like, I can't even explain it because it's kind of convoluted. Makes way more sense. And to have Turnip Head be in love with Sophie's sister, who he actually knew and had met before, that whole thing just made a lot more sense to me. My guess is that they just wanted to keep Turnip Head in the movie because it's pretty an iconic piece of imagery and they needed somewhere for the missing prince to be. But the whole thing with him being in love with Sophie never made sense to me in the movie, so I did prefer that in the book. Also, although I've seen a lot of discussion around Howl's Moving Castle as a movie and Sophie having magic in the movie, I think it's pretty subtle in the movie, whereas in the book, it is outright stated that Sophie has magic. She doesn't know herself for a while, but she is actually quite powerful. And she has a very defined magic of being able to bring things to life. She speaks life into things. So she speaks to her sewing and she brought life and magic into it. She spoke to her walking stick and it turned basically into a wizard's staff. She spoke into Turnip Head and that's what helped that. And I thought that was cool that it was so defined in the novel. Overall, I was just extremely charmed by this novel in a way I wasn't expecting. I actually read this one on my own because I wanted to get through it quicker than if I had read it out loud, but I'm for sure gonna go read it out loud to my daughter. I just unironically enjoyed this. And it's harder sometimes as an adult reading a middle grade. Sometimes it's too simple or whatever. And I finished this in 24 hours. I was totally hooked. I loved it. Now, I will say, I do think because I'd seen the movie first, I brought a lot of the Ghibli aesthetic into the novel, which I do think helps, right? Again, I love the Ghibli aesthetic. So I do think my experience reading this book was kind of a blend of both. And they are very different from each other in a lot of ways. I like both, but if you love the movie, I just highly recommend reading the book because it's really good. My edition of the book also had an extra interview at the end with Dianna Wynne-Jones, and there was just a part that I wanted to read because I thought it was kind of cool. Were you surprised by Hayao Miyazaki's vision of the castle and characters of Howl's Moving Castle? I was surprised by Miyazaki's Moving Castle because I had not thought of the castle having feet. In the book I wrote, the castle is more like a hovercraft and floats an inch or so above the ground, but I am very fond of Miyazaki's castle. I have several models of it around the house. As for Howl and Sophie, both of them are gentler and more noble than the characters in my books. But I wasn't surprised by this. Movies are always different. I have several models of Howl and Sophie around the house too, and quite a few calcifers, one of which sits in my fireplace. I really liked that quote. I liked it for several reasons. One, I obviously imagine the castle having moving feet because I watched the movie first, so I thought that was interesting to see the difference. And I always love it when an author really likes an adaptation, even if it's much different from the book, and it seems to me that the author has a lot of love for that adaptation, so I thought that was neat. Okay, I hope that was insightful for you, especially if you're a Ghibli lover, or perhaps you came here because you love one of these novels and wanted to know a little bit about the movie. I highly enjoyed this project. I would honestly recommend all 3 books. I really enjoyed them. I'd recommend all 3 movies. I think they're very, very good. And I would love to know your experience with Ghibli. Have you been a fan for ages, or did you become a fan in your adulthood like me? Tell me which one is your favorite Ghibli movie. Tell me if you have read any of these books and how you thought they compared to the movies and which one you liked better. All of that stuff. Drop it in the comments below. And as always, if you like these kind of deep dives and videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye. I'm sure you can't tell what my favorite Studio Ghibli movie is just based on the background here.